My name is Knox Johnston, and I'm the founder of Clipper Ventures, but I was also the first person to sail solo non-stop around the world. Before I attempted around the world, I'd done quite a lot of sailing, but mainly, in fact almost entirely, around the Indian Ocean. But then I built my boat in Bombay and sailed home via Arabia, East and South Africa, and then non-stop to London. So before I set off around the world, I got at least 20,000 oceanic sailing miles and probably more than 500,000, nearer 1 million miles actually on ships. And I'd built my boat, so I had a number of advantages over the other contestants. One, I knew my boat inside out. Secondly, I not just built it, I'd sailed it, so I knew how she handled. And I'd also done a voyage from Cape Town to London, which took 77 days. With 3 of us, which gave me a very good idea of the sort of food quantities I require and also the spares I'd need. So of all the people who set out, I was probably actually the best prepared. Well, at the time, no one thought it was possible to go non-stop around the world. The longest voyage made a couple of years before was by Francis Chichester, who stopped once in Australia. So that was a very long voyage in those days. So the moment you say, well, we're going to go on, you're in unknown territory. You don't really know if the boat will stay in one piece, if your brain will stay sane. You just didn't know. You know, as I say, after we passed Australia, we're into unknown territory. We didn't know what would break on the boat. And I had some big, strong fittings shearing off. And you thought, wow, this is worrying, because what could break next? You've obviously got the problem with the very, very big seas down there. At that time, not recognized by the scientists. That only came in the 1990s. They realized what we sailors have been saying for centuries, that waves of 80 or 90 feet exist, was actually true. And you get faced with one of those, if you haven't worked out how to handle your boat, and I hadn't initially, it took me the first storm to really work it out, find out how she lay most comfortably. Your boat is very, very vulnerable, because she'll run down the front of those waves, and remember, the top of those waves can be moving at 20 plus miles an hour, whereas the main wave isn't going that fast, but the top, the bit that breaks, is. And if your boat's doing, say, 4 or 5 knots, it's going to hit you with considerable force. It's also going to completely swamp the boat, because it's going to go over the top of you. And these are things that we were still learning about at that time. In fact, the only real information, Chichester's book wasn't out, was the Smeatons, who'd been pitch-poled in their 50-footer. And you say, well, a 50-footer gets pitch-poled, what are those waves like? And of course, now we know a lot more about it, and we know those, what we call rogue waves, do actually exist, and more frequently than people realized. So getting to, A, face those enormous waves for the first time, far bigger than anything I'd seen otherwise, and secondly, getting your boat comfortable in them, that was probably the most important thing I had to do in the whole race. Well, people often ask, you know, what was it like spending that time at sea? I mean, the first thing is to say that I thought it would take 300 days. So I was equipped for 300 days plus 10%. So I reckon in theory I had enough food for 330 days. Probably actually had a little bit more than that at the end, but I didn't need it. So I'm mentally ready for that length of voyage. Now, the other part of that is, of course, a boat cannot be left on its own. It needs steering, it needs maintaining, it needs navigating. The crew's got to be fed, the crew's got to sleep. So actually, you're pretty busy. And I think people don't realize just how busy you are. And your big thing every day was just seeing how much the new position had moved. How many miles have I covered today? Oh, 95, not very good. And then some days they go, 125, brilliant. And you promptly use the Hiscock rule. You calculate your ETA on the latest top speed, not being realistic and taking it on the average. Well, I didn't get any problems mentally. Only time I thought I had a problem, I heard the sound of a steam train. I was at 15 miles, 1,500 miles into the Pacific. And I knew perfectly well there was no steam train there. And literally the hair on the back of my neck went up and I shot up on deck. And there was a blue whale blowing about 200 yards away. Now a blue whale 100 feet, weighing 100 tons, is 3 times the length of Suhaili and 10 times heavier. My real concern was to tiptoe past it in case it made a mistake and started getting amorous with my little boat. I think the difference between sailing around the world in a 10-ton boat, which is waterline length of 26 feet and limited sail area, and an out-and-out racer, 60 feet long, 4 times the sail area, that actually weighs no more than your small boat. That's one simple word for it: speed. And this means speed helps speed, because if you're going to go faster, you don't need as much food, you don't need as many spares, you're less likely to do damage because you're not at sea so long, and so everything sort of works up to make it easier to go more quickly. But the other factor is, of course, in that intervening 40-odd years, we got satellites. Now you can get very accurate weather information, and this means you can actually choose where you want to go to get the best out of your boat, which was not something I could do in 68, 69. All I had was a barometer, and I had to work out what weather was coming with that. And if I was too close to the center of a depression, well, just too bad. I couldn't tell how far I was. These days, the accuracy of these weather forecasts is phenomenal, and you really can choose where to put your boat. So therefore, you sail much, much faster. If you're on your own, I think you need to be pretty stubborn, and you've got to be very self-sufficient. Perhaps less self-sufficient these days when you've got immediate access to people for advice. But I think you've got to be pretty stubborn and want to do it. If you're going around a crew, you've got to be someone who can mix. I think a sense of humor is absolutely essential. Enthusiasm is essential. And if you've got those two, we can make a good sailor out of you, because you'll mix in well, and your attitude will be the right one to help us develop you. So when I'm choosing crew, that's one of the main things I'm looking for. And someone who doesn't really show an interest is quite likely to get the push. I've got a lot of people I admire in our sport. Rodney Patterson, obviously, Ben Ainsley, and in France you've got people like Loic Perron, and there's plenty of others, people who I know are extremely capable in their branch of our sport. And you must think of our sport as rather like athletics. We have everything from the 100 meters to the marathon, with high jump and everything else thrown in between, because there are such different aspects to it. You know, I like the short-handed long-distance sailing. Patterson and Ainsley, they actually go out for a day and belt round some cans and use their skills to get round first. It's a different game. But there's others in other countries too you look up to and say, well, they're good. You know, I respect them. Or if I can beat them in a race, I've done well. It's always a good way of measuring yourself.